Hello, everybody. I am Abby Gardner here with Megan McGee. We are the Plate and Palate Podcast with Megan and Abby. And today we are going to be chatting about all of the buzzwords that you hear around food and nutrition and trying to make sense of some of them and share with you what we do know about these words, what they really mean, and maybe you may actually leave with more questions than answers, to be really honest. But it at least will be a starting point for conversations that you can start to have and questions that you can start to ask as you are applying some of what you're learning today. So, hi, Megan.
Hi, Abby. It's good to see you. I'm so glad to be here and to have this conversation.
Me too. It's an
I
important
It's an
one.
important one. It is. The food industry is so confusing. It really is. And
Yeah.
I am excited to have this conversation, but I think you and I both will agree just that as we start to have this conversation, there is even more questions to ask, even more confusion around what does it really mean? Um, and food is definitely a commodity. It's an industry. And yes, we all need it to be able to nourish ourselves and take care of our bodies. At the end of the day, just that though, the food industry is a commodity. It's about dollars and cents. Abby, do you want to just kind of reintroduce yourself and then we'll get
Sure.
going?
Yeah. Hello again, Abby Gardner. I own Abby Cooks Wild and meal prep and delivery service based in Colorado, but I also offer online and virtual programs like the Beyond the Box Supper Club or Entrepreneurial Eats. So reach out, post below or comment if you'd like more info, or you can just go to my website, abbycookswild.com, and get all the info there.
Yay. Thanks,
Yay.
Abby. And I'm
Yeah.
Megan McGee. I am a registered dietetic tech and a certified mind body eating coach. My practice is Nourish Nutrition Consulting. My practice is virtual, so I see clients all over. I am based in Thornton, Colorado, but truly have clients all over the US, even Hawaii, which is kind of fun. And my passion is really working with clients who have had a health diagnosis or a health change. We are in an epidemic of disease. We're going to be talking more about that. And there's still a lot of gap or lack of conversation of what do we do when there is a health diagnosis or a health change. So often we go to our doctors, we get the diagnosis, maybe we start a medication therapy, but for many people, we still don't feel good and we don't always understand what are things I can do to help support my body and to sort of take ownership in my health. Um, I never pretend that I can cure an autoimmune condition, but I do believe there's so much we can do to support the body in functioning as optimally as possible, even with a chronic health change. And Abby, I'm really excited this conversation today around buzzwords. I think it does even fit in with whether it's someone who is healthy and wants to maintain their health and is just empowered around food, whether it's someone who has a health diagnosis and is really trying to lean in more on how to take care of themselves. So let's get into some conversation, Abby.
Yeah.
So tell me, let my first question for you
Yeah.
is when you're in the grocery store, what do you look for? Like, especially around buzzwords, like when you are picking, especially like an animal protein or maybe it's eggs, what do you look for? What do you go to?
So I'll be fairly transparent. And if any of you tuning in knows me personally or even professionally, I kind of joke and say I'm a total food snob. In that, to answer your question, I'm buying the $10 carton of eggs.
Mm.
I am buying ground, beef. I'm very like, and I know Megan has also worked with Mindy, but Mindy Kane
Yeah.
is a mutual friend of ours.
Yeah.
She is a rancher in Kersey, Colorado, and I buy her beef whenever I can get my hands on it because I know what Mindy's giving her cows. I have been to her farm. I
Yeah.
have seen her cows. I have actually fed her cows. Um, so if I can't get my hands on cane meats,
Mhm.
at the grocery store, I am looking for grass-fed and grass-finished beef or 100% grass-fed beef. And I think that's a great kickoff
Yeah.
to these buzzwords, Megan, because I think the labeling on a lot of these things is misleading. Um, just because the package says grass-fed does not mean it is 100% grass-fed. A lot of times, and correct me if you have different information, my understanding is that much of the grass finished, I'm kind of mixing up terms here. So there's grass-fed beef, and then there is grass-finished beef. A cow that has been 100% grass-fed from its birth to its death is 100% grass-fed,
Grass-fed.
grass-finished beef.
Mhm.
Okay, and it is available. You
Yeah.
have to know what to look for.
Yeah.
Sometimes in the grocery store, though, you'll find packages that say grass finished, but it
Mhm.
won't say grass fed.
Fed.
That means
Mhm.
the cow grew up in a feedlot,
Mhm.
being fed corn-based beef,
Corn. Yep.
and was fed grass
Mhm.
at the end of its life,
Mhm.
maybe for a month, maybe for
Mhm.
a week, maybe for a day.
Day.
Don't know.
Yeah.
But the label on the package will say it was grass finished,
Mhm.
which leads the consumer to believe that
Mhm.
the cow was fed
Mhm.
a
Grass.
grass diet its entire life.
Yeah.
So I didn't even answer your question. I just dove right
No,
in
I
on
love it. I love it. I
buzzwords.
love it. And
But
I want to add something to that too, Abby, because
yeah,
I think I mean, this conversation is so juicy, right?
yeah,
It really is. One of the reasons we're leaning into this conversation today is the reality that the way an animal is fed that we are going to consume directly impacts the quality of the food we're consuming. So again, as we get into some of these additional buzzwords, how the animal is raised and what they're fed directly impacts what we then consume. It impacts, for example, their stress hormones. It impacts their gut integrity. So if an animal is being fed, for example, corn and soy, which is not innate, it changes their health. It changes the nutritional value of what we then consume as well. So that's also why we're kind of getting into these
yeah.
conversations. You bet.
It is, and I think people have become so detached
Mhm.
from where things are coming from.
Mhm.
So you have to, there's no way to, um, you have to have um, a a working knowledge
Mhm.
anymore. It is ignorant
Mhm.
to go to the grocery store
Mhm.
and just throw stuff in your cart without thought behind it.
Right.
I mean, that's I shouldn't state that as fact. That is my opinion.
Mhm. Yeah.
However, I think the way the standard American diet has evolved, um, we're so detached. There
Mhm.
are people who think like, little kids. I remember in my son's preschool class, um, you know, there were kids that thought that apples grew on the store shelves. They had no idea that
Right.
there were trees
Right.
involved.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, you know, that level of disconnect is just
Yeah.
continuing to build on itself.
Yeah.
And I think that there are some people, there is a movement of people who are coming back around
Mhm.
to wanting to know
Mhm.
where is this coming from?
Mhm.
What's it being fed? How
Yeah.
is it being cared for?
Yeah.
And there are it's kind of a granola approach. If we're talking mainstream here, it feels a little out there, it feels a little woo-woo, but you have to take responsibility for making those choices for yourself.
Yeah. I think the challenging, and I love what you just said, Abby, I'm 1,000% on board. I think the challenging part that so many people experience is, where do you get that good information? Where do you
Right.
get those resources? Because one of our buzzwords that we're going to talk about today is the USDA, US Department of Agriculture. And they are the ones who set some of the guidelines and some of the rules around the manufacturing of food. They do a lot of things. So the USDA is important for agriculture. It's important for economic development. It's important for natural resources, conservation, science. It's a big entity, the USDA.
And they do good work. I mean,
And they do good work.
I don't want to give the impression to anyone tuning in that the USDA is this bad, evil thing.
Right.
It's not. They have a role, and it is an important role.
Absolutely. The question then becomes, though, is because of how much they impact dollars and cents, right? So $1.42 trillion of gross domestic product comes from the USDA. That's 2022. $1.42 trillion. Of that, $223.5 billion comes from American farmers. So this is big business. This is big money. And I'm not the person to tell you all the ins and outs on the USDA, but just knowing how much money is involved, it also makes me wonder how much politics is involved. And again, food is now a commodity. Just like big farm, agriculture is big money. And so there's a lot of players involved. And so the messaging that we're receiving around food, I think, gets blurrier and blurrier.
Yeah. I mean,
So it's hard.
yeah. I mean, and you are a professionally credentialed
Mhm.
health specialist in your field, and it is even confusing to you.
It really is. It really is. I would,
So,
yeah. So for me, and again, in my confusion, in my shopping and trying to figure things out,
yeah.
I mean, I would say one of my biggest go-tos around, especially animal protein, maybe not all my foods, but especially animal protein, is I always look for organic, number one. There's other words beyond that too to look for, but let's just start there as another buzzword. So organic. The implication with organic is that there's no herbicides, pesticides, or antibiotics involved. I think that's a big deal just out of the gates, and especially when it comes to animal protein. So if we're choosing a non-organic animal protein, which therefore has exposure to hormones, antibiotics, etc., pesticides, herbicides, we are consuming that. And I think it's a huge implication around health change, which we're going to talk about more in another episode here. And not to be crass, but even look at how young girls are developing so much earlier. We have to consider how our foods are impacting us.
Because food is impacting that.
Oh,
Don't
absolutely.
don't be fooled by that. That
Right.
is a huge reason why.
Yeah, absolutely. There are And I love where you started even grass-fed versus grass-finished, right? Because again, we have all these buzzwords and what do they really mean at the end of the day? So then we've got pasture raised and we've got free range. And how does that all fit together? So with pasture raised, theoretically, the animal, chicken, cow, whatever the animal is truly being raised in a farm environment outside, grazing from the land, not in any type of, let's call it captivity. So no pens, no cages, right? So theoretically, pasture raised, again, because they're in the sun, they're eating from the grass, they are truly out in the farm. These animals are also not giving hormones. They're not given hormones or antibiotics. And often we're using the hormones and antibiotics, things like that, when animals are enclosed, because we want them to grow faster and we also want them to not get sick and spread disease amongst the coop, right? So pasture raised is probably a better way to go. Again, those animals are not giving hormones, antibiotics, etc. The question, though, that I have is, although they're eating the grass, they're not being fed a food or a product, if you will. They're truly eating from the earth. The question, though, is that farm organic? So if that farm, for example, is treating the grass with herbicides and pesticides, yeah, the animals are eating that grass. And no, they're not in pens or cages. They're not being directly given hormones or antibiotics, but now they're eating potentially grass that's been treated with pesticides, for example. This is where I think kind of bridging that when you can, as best as you can, doing organic and pasture raised is probably the way to go, because that means that the grass the animals are eating is also not being treated with anything. And you probably have a much higher integrity there. I think free range is one of those really blurry words, because the guidelines on free range are, I'm going to say soft.
Good
Free
word.
range, yeah, soft, right? Yeah.
There's lots of gray area in there.
Gray, very gray. I mean, free range could theoretically mean that, let's say the chickens are all in one warehouse. They're not in individual pens, but they're in one warehouse. They're on top of each other, but because they're not in a pen and they could theoretically move around, and maybe there's a window, I mean, theoretically that could be free range. Maybe there's like a garage door on one side of the warehouse and they roll it up. There's a gate, so they can't leave the warehouse, but because there's access to outside, that's free range. It's just, there's so many gray zones. There's so many gray zones.
Yeah. And I do want to kind of go back to organic for a minute.
Please?
Because
Yeah.
I think it's a buzzword, yet it's not a buzzword. It's become much more mainstream. And I also, there are farmers who utilize organic practices, but are not able to afford to pay the fee
To have it labeled.
the designation of organic.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go back to Mindy, our wonderful friend Mindy, for a moment.
Check out Mindy Kane. She's amazing.
Mindy Kane in Kersey, Colorado, Kane Meats.
Kane Meats.
She's incredible.
She's fabulous.
And so is her husband, Mark.
Yes.
But, I don't want to leave Mark out of this conversation, but going back to this whole thing, Mindy and Mark cannot claim to the world that their beef is organic, that Although the cows have free range, free roam access to the entire farm. They graze on grass all day long. She and Mark actually feed their cattle hops that were used to brew beer.
Yeah, so great.
And they are intentional about what kind of hops, where those hops are sourced from.
Yeah. I know Mindy and I've even talked about, I mean, she's had her meat tested for the fatty acid content. She and I have had conversations around that. My expertise is not in ag, so we've had conversations, but I mean, they are very diligent about even looking at the ratio of fat content in a good way, like the good fats we need and the protein load and the integrity of her beef. I mean, that's a step that she doesn't have to be doing that, but that's how committed they are to the work they're doing.
Yet, if they wanted to have the designation of any of these buzzwords that we're talking about, they would not be able to pay the fee. I'm saying it's a fine. It's not a fine. The fee to obtain that designation. So then that further muddies the water because you want to support those types of farmers, but there's no way to know where to go. And I shouldn't say that there is nowhere to know. There are places you can go online to learn about, like, the eggs at the grocery store. Honestly, not the eggs you want to be buying, because those are the farms that Megan was talking about.
Kind of the more mass production.
Yep. Right. And so then you have to kind of dig deeper and figure out, okay, where are the reputable farms? Where are they sending their eggs? And where can I buy them where I live? And I will be very honest, I have done a little digging around on behalf of all of us. And sadly, the eggs that are raised in like Amish country are not shipped to Colorado. So then you end up going to Whole Foods and buying the brand that you are least familiar with. That is generally the way to go, quite honestly. That I get the organic, free range or pastured eggs that are branded with a company name that you've never heard of are probably those are the eggs that have the reputation of being the best of the best. I hope that makes sense, because this is hard to absorb.
It is. It is. Because it's so gray. That's why it's so hard.
Right.
So even as a nutrition professional and as someone who is so hands-on with food and cooking, right? Like, it is still very confusing for us who, as we put a lot of time and energy into conversation around food, personally, professionally, it's hard for us to talk about because it is so gray. And again, I believe because there's so much money involved with food, sadly, it's meant to be gray. It's meant to be vague. One of the things that I'm going to just add on, Abby, that I think you were kind of alluding to, but I just want to sort of articulate. I think it's very valuable to think about truly, I'm going to say it this way, shopping local, right? Especially here in Colorado, there are great farms, including, we've been shouting out Mindy Kane, but whether, it's your local farm stand that sells eggs, have a conversation with the farmer. Right? Especially, I mean, we have so many farmers markets here in Colorado, all over Colorado, coming soon. And so asking questions, ask the farmer, how are your chickens raised, right? Things like that. But if it's possible, trying to get local proteins, whether it's beef, whether it's chicken, whether it's eggs, whatever, I think there's value in that. And you're right, Abby, a lot of these smaller farms, they just don't have the backing financially to be able to put an organic stamp on it because it costs a lot. And in some ways, I like that idea that we're making organic that important. We're saying you have to complete these steps and follow these rules to get this stamp because of the integrity. I think there's
Right.
value in that. But for the little guy who can't afford to do that, what
Yeah.
happens there, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So, if you have a friend who lives or a neighbor that raises chickens in their backyard and you lament that the rooster crows every morning, maybe become friends with that person so that you can get their eggs.
I love it. That's a good one, right? Yeah, absolutely.
Um,
Absolutely.
you
Yeah.
know, but then, going back to eggs, and I know Megan, we kind of had a game plan coming into this
Yeah.
conversation. I'm about to throw Megan a curveball, so forgive me, my friend. But going back to eggs,
Mhm.
so so much of um with with that whole thing, like the color of the yolk,
Mhm. Mhm.
is that a true indication of how healthy or how well fed the
There,
chicken has been?
yeah, there really is and there is some real conversation there, you bet. I think for what it's worth, just to kind of lean into that, if
Yeah.
you wanted to do an experiment, I think you can normally tell the difference in the integrity of the eggs. So if you want to do an experiment at home, even if you were to go to the grocery store and buy, let's say, a 6-pack of just the cheapest egg you could find versus a 6-pack of the $10, right? The higher integrity, I think the actual egg itself will look different physically. The shell inside the yolk itself, the white, right? Normally you can taste the difference too. Mhm.
I
Yeah.
will say I was on a cruise ship last week and I don't know, I went into like the dining room versus like the buffet line and ordered eggs, scrambled eggs. I couldn't eat them because
Oh, you,
they looked like they weren't real eggs. Like they looked like powdered eggs to me. You know how like powdered eggs,
they have a
they look
yellowy, like a,
crumbly. They look
yeah,
crumbly. It's like
yeah.
taco meat. I'm
Huh.
like, I can't eat this. I'm not eating this.
Wow, I'm surprised, like ordering versus
Right.
the
I was
buffet.
too.
Very
I
common
was
at the
too.
buffet.
Common in the buffet, but we were at the dining room. I thought, okay, they'll crack
Okay.
a couple eggs for me. No, they didn't.
Mhm.
But yeah. Um
Yeah.
I don't like eating eggs unless I know that that yolk is like a really deep
The
yellow.
integrity,
Mm-hmm.
you bet. One of the last things that I'll share that I think is really important is when it comes to shopping and
Mm-hmm.
choosing, I get that for a lot of us, we have to think dollars and cents. I get it, right? My my suggestion, my recommendation is number one, be a smart shopper, look at what's on sale.
Yeah.
Number two, I think choose what's most important to you and where you're willing to spend the extra money. Hands down, I think it's because I was also a vegetarian for 20 years. So now that I'm a meat eater again, like I'm pretty, like I want to know I'm getting good quality meat. Like that's a big deal for me, especially as a from going 20 years as a vegetarian. I don't skimp on the animal protein. I don't buy cheaper animal protein because that's really just one area that's very important to me as a shopper. Do I buy, let's say, crackers that are organic? Maybe. I mean, it just kind of depends on if they're on sale. If it's a cracker I like, sure. But is that like my go-to? Ooh, these crackers, I got to make sure they're organic. Uh, Probably not. But things like my fruits and vegetables and my animal protein, those are areas where I'm willing to spend the money. And I really believe either you spend the money on the front side, maintaining your health, or you spend it on the back side. So I get that maybe we can't, from a financial perspective, we need to make appropriate decisions. Maybe we can't buy everything we eat organic and, pasture raised or, some of these buzzwords we've been talking about. And I definitely appreciate that. but maybe it's worthy of some pause and just reevaluating, what am I consuming? How much of my food is higher quality? Where do I want to put my dollars and cents?
And I think, shop with the thought in mind that you're going to buy the best that you can afford. It doesn't, this isn't a conversation of you can only eat organic, because, organic potato chips are still potato chips. And I think a lot of people think that if it has the word organic in it, it's somehow healthier, which is not true. Just because it says organic doesn't mean it's healthy. It just means that it was processed or raised with a higher standard of ingredient.
Makes me think of Whole Foods. I'm a big fan of Whole Foods, but I don't think everything in Whole Foods is healthy. And
no, not by a long shot.
I have a lot of clients who are like, oh, I've been shopping at Whole Foods, so it's healthy. And those words aren't synonymous, but it's interesting. Just we start to kind of believe these things. Oh, if I buy it at Whole Foods, it must be good integrity. And I love Whole Foods, so I'm not, downplaying Whole Foods. But again, we need to ask more questions. Who says? Yeah. Abby, do you want to give a quick resource of maybe where people could go?
Yeah. So we are going to do another segment on this specific thing, but I will mention it here anyway. The Clean 15 and the Dirty Dozen produce guidelines are put together. A lot of people, I think that it comes from the USDA, but it does not. It comes from an organization that I don't even know the name of it. I just know the acronym. It's EWG.org. And they are kind of like an independent group that pays attention to not just food, but, beauty and that kind of beauty supplies and body care and water and all of these different things. And they put out different scientific research and help you kind of navigate, help present the information in a way that it's understandable so that you can make a decision for yourself and your family that you can feel good about. So that is kind of like the first place that I go when I'm looking for information and trying to dig a little deeper to learn more about what does this really mean.
Right. More unbiased, and these are my words. I'm going to say a little bit more human centric versus commodity, money centric, business centric, right?
They have a huge board of directors. And what I like about that is that there are some people on this board who are fairly well known in certain circles. I can't remember the names of course, I was going to mention the names and now I can't remember the names, but there was a doctor that you really like.
Dr. Mark Hyman.
Okay.
Yeah, big fan of Mark Hyman.
So, and they pull people from all different walks of life to have a really good, well-rounded representation. So, I think I can speak for both Megan and I when I say we both encourage you, if you're watching this and you want to learn more, check out EWG.org first, and then let that kind of lead your search on the internet versus Googling, what is the difference between pasture raised and free range eggs?
Right. Yeah. I mean, this was such a great conversation. And one of the things I think I love most is just both of us being able to speak to the lens that as much as you and I are so invested around the conversation of food, we find it noisy and confusing as well.
And it's ever changing. Like just when you think you figure it out,
Right.
Something changes and it throws everything off.
Yeah. Yeah. Abby, thanks so much for your time today. What a great
Thank you.
conversation.
Thank you. So great to be here, as always.
And to our viewers, we will see you soon. Thank you.
Bye, guys.